Hey everyone, welcome back to the Emotional Revolution. I'm so excited to be here today and to share with you my amazing guest, Hannah Soul Marie. And she is the founder of the Brave Bitches Club, which is a community for women to connect, have fun, let their messy out, and grow through the uncomfortable. Today is going to be an amazing episode, and I cannot wait to introduce you. So, Hannah, tell us a little about yourself. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me, Kayla. This is awesome. I had you on my podcast too, and so I loved getting to know you. And I'm excited I get to be here and share a little bit of my story. So I appreciate that. Yeah, so a little about me. I founded the Brave Bitches Club because I had experienced years of not really having solid relationships with other women, not really feeling like I needed it, also not really knowing how to go about it. And so I started, once I kind of went through that journey of really pursuing friendships, really pursuing those dynamic, deep relationships, I realized what a treasure they were to my life and to my soul and to just how it permeated every single aspect of my life. And so I started hosting events. I was like, we need this, ladies. We more women. We need each other, and we need that connection. And so, I just started doing in-person events, and now I do online and in person. And just it's such a magical, fun thing that I do, and an amazing journey I've been a part of.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so great. So I'm kind of a recluse. Like I like my space. I like my house. I do everything from home. I even school my kids from home. So like I like everything at home. And I don't want to say I have a hard time building community, but it's not always a priority for me. So I have my close group of friends, and it's very few people that I actually like confide in. So what was that like for you? What was it like when did you realize that you needed or it was something that you valued and needed to bring into your life?
Yeah, totally. Well, it kind of started with, so I grew up in the Christian church. I left the church when I was 19 after I was in a pretty bad relationship, engagement that broke off. And me leaving the religion was not just me leaving a belief system. It really meant I left my community, I left my identity, I left my entire sense of self and sense of safety in the world. And what really happened is like majority, if not all of the people that I was connected with my entire life, I never really heard from again once I left the church. And so I felt this sense of betrayal and this sense of n- wanting to protect myself, right? And so what I did was for years I decided I didn't need anybody. I was like, I don't need friends. I don't need community. So much easier if I can just live life on my own. Sure, I'll have like acquaintances and people I hang out with, but I don't need to get deep with anyone because for me, that's going to protect me. That's going to keep me safe. And so another way I did that too was like through people pleasing, through shaping myself to be this kind of ideal happy person with everybody I would hang out with because I've always been a social person even when I wasn't going deep. I'm very extroverted. I love connecting. I love hanging with people. But during that time, like I spent so much time shaping myself to be someone that was going to be liked, someone that was going to be perceived a certain way. And what I didn't realize is that that's not sustainable. It wasn't for me, at least. I reached a point where like I was craving growth in my life. I wanted to move to the next step. I wanted to improve my life. I wanted to love my life more, really. And I felt like the thing that I could start with was to connect, to make friends and to reach out into my community. And so how I started doing that was just like, well, first I started apologizing to people. I started reaching out to friends where I'd known to have been a crappy friend. I said, I'm so sorry. Like this is what I thought. This is who I want to be. This is who I was. And then I started reaching out to people and being like, okay, I really like your vibe. Can we hang out? And it was nerve wracking and scary. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know like how do I make a friendship? How do I actually do something that feels fulfilling? And, but I really felt like the key was if I can be honest, if I can be myself, if I can just show myself who I am, then hopefully the people that like that are going to be attracted to that. And hopefully the people that don't aren't. And so, yeah, it was messy and complicated and I made a lot of mistakes. And, but just being willing to do that, it really did like change my life, like not just my friendships, just that's when I met my husband. And I don't think I would have met my husband and got married and had the relationship I have if I wouldn't have kind of gone on that journey of being like, okay, I'm going to be open. I'm going to be vulnerable. And it was scary. And also it was so amazing and cool. And so that's why I created Brave Bitches because brave to me is so important because it
Mhm.
you have to be brave. Like, you have to be brave to connect. You have to be brave to do anything that you want in this life. But intimacy in and of itself, I think, is something that can feel really complicated and messy, or not accessible. And I think bravery is like the key to that, to stepping into that.
Yeah, yes. Okay. So there's a few things here that I want to ask about because I think it's really important that a lot of times when we try to make connections, we do that externally first, right? So then, like you said, we're showing up as this person that's not who we are because we're trying to be who they want us to be, and we're not being who we
Hmm.
want to be because we're rejecting something within us. So I don't know this to be true about you. But I want to take a guess because you are a human and we're all very similar, that there were some things within you that you needed to accept or start to like so you could
Hmm.
actually build and change your relationship with yourself so you could have a relationship with others. Do you find that to have been part of your journey?
1,000%, 100%.
Yeah.
The key really was I didn't have acceptance for myself,
Yeah.
and I was afraid that, um, yeah, I mean, if I can't accept myself, if I can't accept my darkness and my things, for me, what really was the aspect of myself that I couldn't accept is that I spent a lot of my life in this role of wanting to be the person that made people around me happy, right? So I had some things happen in my childhood where my older siblings were going through really traumatic, difficult things. And so I kind of took on this role as one of the babies of the family of like, okay, I'm going to be the easy one, right? I'm going to be the one that's happy. I'm going to be the one that makes sure everyone's laughing and feeling good. And so I really had a lot of acceptance for my, happy emotions, right? Like my joy, my confidence, my things like this. And I didn't have a lot of acceptance for anything that didn't look like that. So my anger, my sadness, my jealousy, my anything that looked to me that wasn't going to make others happy or make me happy, then to me, I actually genuinely believed when I would get angry, I'd say, this isn't me. This isn't me. I'm not an angry person. I'm not a sad person. And so I had this complete rejection of the fact that, like you said, we're human, right? Like we experience the vastness of all of this. And when I decided to reject those things and decide they weren't allowed, that meant that the people around me weren't allowed to see them, right? And so I'm a big crier. I cry a lot. And most of my life I've been a crier. But you'd be amazed how many friendships I had and relationships that they never saw me cry, which to me blows my mind now because like my husband sees me cry like 3 times a week. Like I cry when I'm happy, when I'm, I cry over everything. And but that's just such a reflection of the fact that I felt so unaccepting of that, so unwelcome to it. Like, and that's why when I had friendships from when I was younger, or when I would start a friendship, when things got difficult, right, or someone would have a conversation with me that made me feel angry or made me feel sad, or I needed to have a conversation with someone because they did something that I was angry about, I thought, well, a relationship isn't supposed to have this. Relationship's not. So I would reject the entire relationship because I couldn't accept it in myself. So why could I accept it in the relationships I had? And so by rejecting those, I would just walk away. I would avoid conversations. I would avoid these things. And so it's, I just see the root of all of that totally was just my inability to say, yeah, you got darkness, girl. You got some issues. You're a little messy. You're not perfect. And yeah, so it really comes from the self before I could come out and have that
Yeah.
experience with others.
So what was that kind of like moment where was there a moment or was it just general awareness? Like, I have to shift this. Like, what made you start to change and work on that relationship with yourself?
Yeah, I think it was mostly that I felt unhappy with my life the way it was. And, I felt unfulfilled. I felt alone. I felt lonely a lot. Like I was surrounded by a lot of people and but I didn't feel like anyone knew me, that anyone could actually, and I didn't really want them to know me at that time either. But it kind of got to this point where it was more exhausting and more scary to not face that stuff and not approach it than it was to say, okay, like I really value joy. I really want to enjoy my life. I don't know if you know the Enneagram, but
Mm.
I'm an Enneagram 7, right? And so a big passion of sevens, right, is to enjoy life, to not miss out on anything, to really pursue that, right? And so, but I hit this point where I was like, I want real joy. I don't want this fake little bit that I get for a little bit and passes, and then I'm down in the dumps again for, weeks or days. I want joy that actually feels sustainable and feels
Mhm.
real. And so, yeah, I started diving into all the self growth stuff. I was reading the books, listened to the podcast. I was jumping in, and so I'm like, please, everyone, give me all the resources so I can learn how to like have real joy. And yeah, and then also I have to give a lot of credit to my husband, because when I started dating him, he has full acceptance for his entire range of emotions. Like, I've never seen someone who's like, yes, this is me. I get angry, I get sad, I get this. And so seeing someone who's so unabashedly just embracing who he was in all aspects of him, including his messy dark side, like that was also a huge eye opener for me to be like, oh, I actually have permission for this. This is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what were some of the things that helped you? So, you dove headfirst into it, and you knew that you needed to have the acceptance. So, you went into all the self help. I mean, that's a
Mhm.
whole thing in and of itself, right? So, what was it that you found the most helpful? And I know it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but what would you say were the things that really supported you?
Totally. Well, I had a couple significant things in my life. The first was I went to Nepal and I stayed in a monastery. And I faced a lot of my shit there. Like,
Mhm.
I realized how much anger I've been holding on to through from like religious trauma, from relationships, just things like that. And it wasn't until I was faced in the monastery, where you would think this is the most peaceful, calm, you know, place in the whole world, which it is externally. But internally I was a mess. I was so angry. I spent so much of my time in this gorgeous, beautiful place feeling so angry. And it was through realizing that I hadn't faced some of the things that I had hurt me from my past. I hadn't faced some of the things that I was holding on to. And I had a lot of conversations with my husband about it. And we talked through, like, why do I feel so angry? What is going on this? So that was a huge part of my growth, was spending time in the monastery, which I know not everyone can just go stay in a monastery for 3 weeks. Like, this isn't like a practical advice, but I think more so what was healing about that, and something that anyone can really take, is that when I did feel this emotion that didn't really make sense for my external situation, it didn't make sense, right? For me to feel all this, but to just allow it, and stopped and said, got curious. Why? What's going on here? What is this whole messy thing happening in my mind and heart that I'm so detached from because I haven't allowed for it? And so it, like, now if I feel angry, I have more of a connection to it. I'm able to stop and listen and kind of understand why. But back then it really was so disconnected from what the original thing was, that I would have no idea why I felt angry or why I felt sad. And so I think just being curious, and allowing myself to investigate that, and having a safe space, someone I can talk through it with, who it allowed me to explore and not judge me, was huge.
Yeah, and I think that's so, and I love that you point out, like, not everyone can run to the monastery, right? But
Yeah.
the thing that you can create, you can recreate those type of moments as well, because it's not, like you said, it's not about the external environment. You're in the most peaceful environment. The difference is that we create these moments in our life every day anyway, especially if you're on this path. But the problem is when we're at home in our everyday life, we follow a distraction, right? The kids become a distraction, or the business, or the spouse, or just the everyday errands. We distract ourselves with that. And so we start to feel something that's uncomfortable. And so then we just follow that path instead of just going deeper into the it being uncomfortable. So we have to be willing to stay uncomfortable in our everyday life, which most people aren't, because I don't have time for that. I don't have time for
Mhm.
this. But I always like to challenge people that you don't have time to stay in the cycles that you're in. So make the time for the discomfort, because it's not going to stay around for long. So just to kind of like pull that together for those who are listening and can't run off to the monastery, they can, it's just that encouragement that you can do this at home. Like, you can use life as a way to push you back
Mhm.
inward. And like you said, when you're aware of it and you don't run from that feeling and you just go straight into it, then you can really start to shift that internal world. And then Another thing too
Mhm.
is it's easier to integrate. I've noticed this. People that go off, and I'm gonna ask you about your experience. People that go off and do things like in something outside of like their everyday, sometimes it's harder to integrate or it's slower to integrate when they get back to their everyday. But I know I've noticed that a lot of times with clients and for myself, when these things happen in the everyday life, it's already integrated. It's already built in as like the awareness that happens in the everyday moment. So what was the integration like for you when you returned?
Yeah, totally. It definitely, the monastery was more like a catalyst and not, right?
Mhm,
It's not like all my healing happened in those 3 weeks and all of a sudden,
mhm,
boom, I go home and everything's fantastic, right? But yeah, it was definitely kind of what spurred and allowed me to see that there was a lot of stuff that I'm not connecting through my body and my emotions and my thoughts and just all of that. And so I think the integration was messy. Like, to be fair, also, I went to the monastery in 2019, and so I got back, and then 2020 hit. So, I mean, if you want, like, I feel like everyone I know, if they're on the self growth path, 2020 was like the year of just real rough, but evolution, the year of evolution,
mhm,
right? It allowed you to face your stuff. And so I also feel like I can thank COVID for that. Like,
mhm. Yeah.
that was my integration time, was
Mhm,
having to face my own stuff. Like, I couldn't run away. I didn't have a lot of distractions. I lost my job. I lost, I was living in a van at the time. And so I lost my home. I couldn't live in my van anymore. We couldn't use the gym to shower. We couldn't,
mhm,
work at a coffee shop. And so I really just had to sit with my stuff. And my husband and I argued so much that year. Like, it's not even funny. We got in so many arguments.
mhm,
And so I think that was my integration, was really just like me coming to terms with facing my own stuff, meant that, like, I I mean, anybody that's in a relationship knows that you're getting triggered. That's just what it is. Being in a relationship is to be triggered, because it is to face all of your own stuff, right? And so I feel like that was, for me, was facing all my stuff through the relationship I was in, through the arguments that we had, through the disagreements and the messiness and the being alone, which is not easy for my extroverted little self to not have any friends or connections during that, few months. And so yeah, that was also a big part of my integration. It wasn't easy and it was hard, and it was, I mean, I didn't know if our marriage was going to last. And now I'm so thankful that we did, like, tread those difficult waters.
mhm.
But yeah, it was a rough time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like you said, it's and what that did was it created that monastery at home, right? There was no distractions. You can't run off in that moment
Hmm.
when you're being forced to stay in. And so you mentioned work. And so I'm curious to know, like with your business, I don't know if you were working for somebody else or working for yourself, but what has this healing journey been like in relation to your business?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's another thing that it's like triggers after triggers. I
Hmm.
just feel like, I mean, anything that you're doing, I feel like I have a relationship with my business, right? So it's also that you're just getting faced with all your insecurities and, anything that you thought you healed, then all of a sudden you're like, well, there's a little bit of gap there where it's not totally healed, and yeah, I mean, at the time when I lost my job in 2020, I was working for someone else. I was doing admin work, and for a health company. And so that's actually when I lost my job. Then that's a few months later, end of 2020, is when I started doing my first Brave Bitches circles. And that came from, one, that I was craving that connection so much. 2020 was rough, and I was like, we can meet out at the beach. Let's meet outside. And so we sat at the beach and we hung out and we connected that way. But yeah, I think so much of my journey and growth I can also thank for the fact that I am to my business, honestly, because I it continually challenges me to pursue better for myself and to grow
Hmm.
more and not to stay small and not and to face my fears and to like figure out what I want. It's like all these things that I feel are applicable to all my life. I think I'm using like a version of that in my business. And so it's been a huge part of my growth for sure. Did that answer your full question? I can't
No,
remember
it
what the
does.
exact question
Yeah,
was.
yeah, no. So,
Okay.
That makes me think about, when you're using your business, so that's my favorite thing to say is your business is the mirror to where you need to focus to grow.
Hmm.
What were some of the things that, and maybe you still are dealing with, what are some of the things that you have to deal with to really continue to show up, be visible, right? So you're creating a community, you're showing up on a podcast, you do all these different things in a more visible way. What are some of the things that you have had to do or have to do to be able for you to show up that way?
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out. I feel like I'm always adjusting and working through that. Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned this because a few months ago, um, I kind of hit this like roadblock back in maybe September where I got totally burnt out on everything that had to do with my business. And I felt stretched thin. I was exhausted. I didn't know where to go. I felt like I lost all my creativity and inspiration. I'm an idea girl. I usually have 1,000 ideas flowing through my head at any time. And I felt like I had no ideas, which I was like, okay, something's not right here. And so even though I've been now I'm like in 4 years in, you would think I would have like the right systems and right things in place to keep me healthy and keep me good so that I can keep running my business. And honestly, I was confronted that I didn't. It wasn't until this year that I really realized that. And so I started to really investigate into myself, like what are my needs and what do I need to do to fulfill my own tank and my own self so that I can continue to show up. And so like one thing I realized was I am, like I said, I am hugely extroverted. I fill my tank by spending time with people. And I'm living outside of the States right now. I'm in Peru. And so my social, environment's a little different. People live here for a couple weeks and then they're gone, or I'm connecting with people online. And I realized I was showing up to all of my events with this like need for the events that I was hosting to satisfy me. And so I kind of realized I felt like I was that girl that like really likes this boy and wants to date him so bad, but like is like so desperate for it that the guy's like turned off. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, all right. Like you don't need me to call me every hour, you know? And so that was kind of my energy coming into this was like I was waiting for my business. I was waiting for my events to fulfill me. And I think that I was turning off other people who were like, I feel that energy. I feel this desperate need. You're not coming in full. You're coming in needing something from me. And so I started to reevaluate what do I need. And so like now I am prioritizing in my weekly time. I've joined a couple groups where we meet twice a week and we talk about our businesses. We talk about life and I connect with them and it fills my tank. And I also am collaborating with the creation of the events. So now I'm having co-hosts with all the events I'm hosting. And so those are two things that have made such a drastic difference where it allows me to create community in the creation and then also my day to day of my business. I'm doing it in a way that allows me to connect with other people in that way too. And so, yeah, but I'm still figuring it out. I mean, I'm like day by day. It's like, you never know.
what 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 are some things that, because this is one thing that I find really often is in business we're either all in or we're about to quit, right? Especially in our growth phases of business,
Hmm.
right? So we're diving as hard in, I mean we're grinding, and then that leads to burnout like you said, and then it's like, well, maybe this isn't for me. And a lot of people on that maybe this isn't for me, they create a pivot, they have a new revenue stream, they do something instead of just buckling down, moving through the discomfort and seeing what's not aligned and then moving that forward.
Hmm.
So what was it for you? Why didn't you quit?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I am a professional quitter. I've quit so many things. I get bored of things really easily and I hop to the next thing. And so that's been a pattern of my life for many, many years. But when I started Brave Bitches, I started it because I really felt like my passion and my vision for bringing women together was so much bigger than my idea of boredom that I was like, I'm going to do this. If I stick with anything in my life, I'm going to stick with this. And so I really just decided that this was going to be something different, that I wasn't going to be a quitter. I wasn't going to be someone that hopped from flower to flower, you know? And so Yeah, I mean, I had a call with a coach in October, where she used to be my coach full time a couple years ago, and I did a one-off call with her in October, and I was just talking to her about how burnt out I was. I didn't know if I wanted to do it anymore, but that I still felt so sure that I wanted to create community for women. And I was like, I still feel so sure of that. But I also don't want to do anything that I've done. I don't want to talk to anyone right now. I don't want to do anything. But I also still feel so sure. And so that's like really the thing is I was like, I can pivot, I can change, I can feed my little like boredom heart that gets tired of things. But I know that I can still keep that core desire, that core passion alive. And so that's I just there wasn't an option for me to quit. It just would my heart would just crumble if I did.
I think that's a really beautiful way to explain that because it's such an alignment with what you wanted, and so you wanted to keep moving forward with that. That's, what it really sounds like, and I think that's really amazing. But I think it's really important to recognize too that let's just play pretend here because I know people out there who are really passionate and they're listening right now and they're really passionate, but they are at their absolute dead end. Like they can't do it anymore. And I'll say this, I'm a professional quitter. I have started over so many times. Every time and my problem is that when I get momentum, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not when things are going bad, it's when things are going really well for me, that's when I would be like, I would stop. I would be like, I am something in my brain would be like, you can't sustain this. People are going to find out you're a fraud, you're a phony, all of these different things. And that has been my cycle over, no matter how passionate I was, no matter how many times I told myself I wouldn't quit, no matter how many, I justified it every way I could. Oh, I'm doing this for my family, or oh, this is better here. Oh, like all of these different things. And we do that. Right. Until what I really heard for you is that until you became really honest with yourself, like you got honest and you got in relationship with yourself of knowing this is a pattern and this is a trigger, right? And I think that's really important to point out because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if we don't recognize that, so that's what I encourage everyone listening to do, is to be really honest with yourself. What is your pattern? What is your self-sabotaging pattern? So when you realize that you had that sabotaging pattern of quitting, what were some of the things that you did to help you support you staying on your path?
Yeah. I mean, I feel that a huge one is having people around me that are also pursuing their passions and, doing the hard thing. I'm thankful. Talking about my husband, I keep bragging on this man, but he's been writing his book series for like 11 years now. And so I have someone around me all the time that is so dedicated to his projects, so driven to never quit, that's also helps me. It gives me so much encourage and inspiration to be like, okay, I can do this. There are hard moments. There are moments that I don't want to do this, but also I have permission to rest. I feel like a huge thing is like when I was burnt out in September, I canceled all my events. I literally canceled all my future events. I had events planned for the next few months and I canceled everything. And I said, I'm stepping away. Now, I'm not saying that that's possible for me. I'm still
Mhm.
so like my business is still like a little baby. And so I have the flexibility to do that. And I didn't cancel them to where I'm never coming back. But I knew I was
Mhm.
like, I need to step away. I need to rest. I need to not put so much pressure on myself to show up in this certain way. And so, yeah, I think the key has just been for me to surround myself with people that inspire me and to give permission for myself to rest. It's just like what I was saying earlier, where I didn't have permission for anger and sadness and all those negative emotions, right? Like this burnout is the same thing, right? It's like so many of us get burnt out or we reach the end of our rope and we're like, well, this is the end. It's all over. The business is burning up and I know I get like that. I'm like everything is, I get in an argument with my husband and I'm like the marriage is over, right? Like I mean maybe not now, but it's like that kind of like mentality that if something goes wrong it's over forever. And so I feel
Yeah.
like just giving permission for the humanity of the fact that we're going to burn out. You're going to hit times where it sucks. And that's normal. And that's in fact it's probably a sign that you're going the right way. And just allowing for that to exist without it meaning some great big horrible thing and that the world's going to blow up.
Exactly. I think that's such an important point too, because we don't have to make everything mean something bigger than what it is. And I know that can get really convoluted, especially for someone
Hmm.
coming from me, where I'm always like, question everything, right? But just because we question everything doesn't mean we make it mean something, right? It doesn't have to now get attached and be this a different label or, a different now badge we wear. It's just now we have deeper understanding, and with awareness things dissolve. And I think that's what happens is like you get
Hmm.
negative feedback from a client or something just doesn't go well or you're overworking, and then now that becomes like it feels like your entire identity, and it's really hard to let go of that because if we don't have that, then what do we
Hmm.
have? So those are some things that we have to question are the patterns that we have, especially the overworkers, the ones that have to keep. I jump from project to project. I don't anymore. I will say that I did realize that within this last year that one of my detriments is that I am so creative and that I get bored. So we're very similar in that way where I'm like, oh, I'm doing the same thing over. Let me
Hmm.
create something
Yeah.
different. And by not doing that and by not dedicating myself to something really specific for a while, then I would lose that momentum. And that was part of my self sabotaging habits. And so, what I would do,
Hmm.
and what I had to learn this last year, is I have had quite a big growth in my business. And so, it was time to hire. And so, I started hiring people in my business. And so, for me, what I would have done in the past would have just been quit or pivot or change. And so I got real serious and honest with myself. And I said, no, now it's time to grow and invest. And that only comes from these honest conversations, like going full circle about what we talked about, started with you liking yourself, right? That came with honest conversations with yourself. And that's the same thing with our business too. If we're not having honest conversations with ourselves about what's happening in the external world and why that's happening because of what is or isn't happening in our internal world, we're just going to keep spinning in those same cycles.
Hmm.
So what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's so interesting. We keep coming back to the same thing, right? Which is just being curious about your inner world, right? And just exploring it and giving permission for it and talking through it and all that stuff. It's like every single thing that we've talked about so far comes back to that.
Mhm. Yeah, and exactly. And the big thing too here to really bring all of this together is also your external world isn't ever going to give you what you need. Not the monastery, not the house, not not the perfect business, not running away from the business. None of that gives you what you need because you still are left searching
Hmm.
for fulfillment when fulfillment can only come from inside of you. And so we use all of these things to go back inside. And so you don't have to burn your business down, right? You don't have to stay up until 6 a.m every single morning and then get up at 8. You don't have to do those things. You just have to find that alignment, trust yourself, have a good
Hmm.
and honest relationship with yourself, and then your business can actually start to change and your life can change, your relationships change, right? I imagine this has been a positive impact with
Hmm.
your relationship with your husband as well, all of this work that you've done.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, because it's that same thing. It's like the ability to work through things that aren't easy, through things that are difficult, through things that challenge us and tell, you know, like create all that, mind storm, right? Of like, you're not good enough, or you're this, or you're not that, or, it's like that same tool is used for every part of your life. If you can face that and be willing to confront it instead of run away or just like pretend it doesn't exist or any of that, if we can just confront it, then I think that helps with my business, that helps with my relationships, that helps with all my career, all of these things. It's just it's like it's such a good skill to have is the ability to experience things that are difficult and to push through and um, allow for it to exist.
Yeah. And to not judge it, right? Like going back to you having a hard time with those emotions of like, anger and jealousy and all those different aspects. One of the biggest things and well, really the best thing we can do for ourselves is to stop judging ourselves. And that comes to our
Mm.
business, our personal growth, because if we're like always comparing ourselves to, Jane over here who's doing so great, or we think she's doing so great, then we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to grow. because we're in constant
Mm-hmm.
state of judgment, and then we're criticizing ourselves, and then we're falling into these stories of, not good enough, and you're just not going to make it, or you're not the type of person who can be successful. We just keep validating that. And so when we stop judging our experience and we just see it, and then we use that experience as that leverage for our growth and shift, then things can happen really rapidly. That's what people don't understand too, is that when you start doing this deep emotional work, your business and your life can really grow at rates that you would have not been able to experience before, because the only reason why we stop anything is because we get in our own way. So when you
Mm-hmm.
remove that tendency to get in your own way, man, it just flows really quickly.
It's wild, actually. And I think some of us, including me, get scared of that, actually.
Yeah.
Right? Like you
Hmm.
said, the self sabotage, where it's like you almost know, okay, if I can just accept and not judge myself and just go for it, it's going to happen. But then you're like, but do I want it to happen? Oh my gosh, what if
Hmm.
it's too much for me to handle? What if I crumble this, or what if this happens? And so then it's like we actually, and sometimes it's unconscious. We don't even know that we're thinking that, but we stop ourselves from going in. Like, I mean, I feel that so much. Sometimes it feels like there's like this giant waterfall behind me, and I need to not let it go too crazy, right? If I do too much healing work, or I pursue things too much, or this, then this waterfall is going to come and it's going to drown me. And like that's just, that's something that I feel like I have to remind myself all the time, is like, the waterfall is good. You have a boat, girl. You're going to just ride the boat. You're going to figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
but it gets easy to feel like, okay, well, if I do go for it and it does work out, that sometimes that can be just as scary.
Yeah, I often think people have more of a fear of success than they do of failure. I say this all the
Mm.
time because we face failures all the time in our life. I mean, we try, how many times did it take us to walk, right? We failed, we just got up and did it again, right? We're
Yeah.
very familiar with failing, and that's why I think we stay in sabotaging cycles, is because it's so familiar to not succeed in whatever.
Hmm.
And so that's just so much more of a known, and there's so much safety in that people don't like to admit, but it is very much wrapped up into it. But there's a lot of times the success is so unknown. We don't know what it's like at the next level of success because we've never attained it. And so that's something that is really hard for us to wrap our brain around, and to be able to step into it so freely can be really difficult. And I think that that's a huge problem for people, is not fear of failure, it's fear of success. And then it's fear of
Hmm.
success and then loss, right? So now I get a level of success and then I lose that. Then I validate all these other experiences, or I can't sustain it, or I burn myself out. And you just go into all these stories. And it's like, girl, just step into that success and figure it out along the way. Like you've done all
Hmm.
the time. Like you've gone through your worst days. You can continue to do that. And so it's really that belief in yourself to be able to step into it. But I do find it very common for, and that was my thing, right? What am I going to do? How am I going to continue managing my four children, my house, my relationship with my husband, my business, all of these different things if I reach this next level in my business? And then it just comes to now, well, if I want to reach that next level, what do I have to do? For me personally, in the place I was at, it was
Hmm.
hire. I had to hire people. I couldn't keep doing it
Hmm.
myself. I couldn't keep wearing the badge of Superwoman and getting, that couldn't have been that anymore. I had to step into delegation. So it just always comes back to this, what we were talking about, just being completely and totally honest with yourself and not judging the rate of your growth either.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think the delegation thing too, that's huge, because I think a lot of us that start businesses, especially if you're the one wearing all the hats, where you're like, okay, I'm handling the marketing and the technology and the, all these things, right? Then you almost don't want to ask for help. You don't
Yeah.
want to delegate. You don't want to
Hmm.
give up, because it's your little baby that you've
Yeah.
grown, and you're like, if I give it up, then it's not going to be my little baby anymore. It's not going to be this. And I'm sure as a parent, you probably relate to this, seeing your kids grow up, right? And realizing they have more freedom and they have more things that they're taking on with themselves. It's like that with a business. I feel like we have to have permission for that too. For it to grow, you have to be willing to ask for help. You have to be willing to not do everything, and not,
Yeah.
and that's something that I haven't hired anyone yet, but I already feel that trepidation. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so scary. Like, I don't even know how I would trust someone to handle my email list, or trust someone to handle my, you know the running of the scheduling of the events, or things like that, because I'm like, this is something that I have put so much heart and soul into, and it really feels like my little tiny child. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's a huge part of growth too is just also a willingness to accept help and ask for it.
Yeah, for me, it was a big, I had made up this story that not that anybody else couldn't do it as good as me, but I had made up this story that nobody else could do what I was doing because it was all from my own brain. So I just
Mm-hmm.
made this up like, oh, who could help when I'm not even I don't even know what I'm doing until I'm doing it, and like it was like this, like I romanticized it, and I'm like, that
Yeah.
is the biggest load of shit I've ever heard. You just don't commit to things, and you
Yeah.
refuse to plan, and so I
Mm-hmm.
had to come really hard with that. And even after hiring, it has been nonstop over and over and over of like, you have to plan further than the next hour. Like if you want your business to grow and scale, like you have to get planned. You can't just have an idea and then launch it and then
Mm-hmm.
figure it out along the way every single time. And so that was my biggest thing of like, shedding that story that nobody could help me because I was just this free spirit. I'm like, well, this free
Mm-hmm.
spirit better get it together or you're going to stay exactly where you're at. Like that was the hard
Yeah.
truth I had to tell myself. Like if I can't be willing to put things on paper and send them out for other people to do and then trust that they can do it, then my business will be exactly where it is next year or I will quit because I'll be so overwhelmed. So that's what
Totally.
you have. I mean, you have to have those conversations, and it's a lot. So I think just as a side note, I started to trust myself more, and that made it easier to trust. And the right people came into my life that it didn't. I hired out one time and it didn't work out, and that's okay. But I had the intuition immediately on the call that I shouldn't hire her, but I got too excited and I did it anyway. But it didn't last long and nothing bad happened from it. It was just like, okay, we're done with that. But the other
Mm-hmm.
people that I've hired have been absolutely amazing, and very much in line and know how I work. One of them, my husband also, so like he kind of gets me, and so that helps
Mm-hmm.
really a lot. And he's way more structured than me, so he's helped with that part. But those are those things too. When we're open to it, the right people will come as well. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, that's them, or no, it's not. And just as a word of encouragement, if you think no, it's not, then definitely don't go ahead with that because it can create a
Yeah.
disaster.
Totally
Yeah.
trusting that. Yeah. And again, that
Mhm.
goes back to what we were saying about knowing your weaknesses, right? And so you're
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm aware of my weakness. That maybe I like to float along and fly by the seat of my pants and figure it out as I go, which I totally am too. I feel like we are very similar
Similar.
because
Yes.
almost every event I've scheduled, I have the name and I have the date
Yep.
and I start
Every
promoting it. And I'm like, I'll fill in the gaps.
fill in the
We're
gaps.
good.
Mhm.
And I do, and it's
Every
worked out every time.
and it's worked
But,
out every time.
yeah.
And that was fine when it was just me, but then it's like, but now I have a great example. So I have a mastermind, and it launches, or it starts in January. I launched it and filled it in less than 48 hours, sold out. And
Cool.
so, but all I had was the name of the program, and I didn't even have a start date. I just knew we were going to start the 1st of January. And I had a
Yeah.
good idea of a description of what we would do in that mastermind. I posted a couple of times. I sent it out to some like curated people. I sold it out. And then I thought, "Oh crap, when I was setting down to go do it, I'm like, I don't do this stuff anymore. My person who does my stuff on my back end does it. Now I have to get all of this stuff ready to get to her to create the worksheets and to put it into my Kajabi and to do all of these things and have the dates and create the calendar links and do all of those things." And I was like, oh, that's what I have to be more planned. So I can be all this free
Hmm.
spirit, but then I have to rein myself in and say, well, if I don't want to end up having to do this at the last minute, then I have to plan it out. So that was like a huge
Hmm.
thing for me of like, okay, I get it now. Like
Yeah.
this is to my detriment, and it will be to my detriment because I've been able to focus on so many other things like I'm getting my coaching certification accredited. And that only came from me allowing and going against my weakness, which is scheduling, and leaning into someone who could help me. And so this is like one of those beautiful things that we think we're stuck or we think we're spinning, but we're not. We're just to a place where we have to stop, have change our relationship with what we're doing and be honest with ourselves to change our
Hmm.
relationship and our story and our narrative and our patterns that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's doable. It's just
Mhm.
you have to be willing to admit it and realize. And I think I mean I worked for a small coffee shop before, and this was years ago. And like the owner never wanted to admit that they were not an organized person. I'm like, you need to admit that so you can hire someone who's organized, or you can, like some way outsource, right? And I think there's so many of us that do that we want to be like, nah, we got it, I figured everything out, right? But like, if you can actually admit and acknowledge, okay, this is my weakness, here's how can I fill those gaps, then I feel like that's where we allow for growth in our business.
Absolutely. And I don't, and this is a thing that I really encourage people to do. I love that you framed it like that. You have to ask for your weaknesses. I have a funny story I like to share. I was
Yeah, go
hosting a
for it.
retreat, and I have somebody who's also my best friend that helps me in my business and my planning for my retreats because I mean, I am me and she knows that. Okay. So we were there, we're at dinner for the first night. The retreat people for at the conference center came up. They gave me the master key to everything. They gave me the master key. And I look around and Nikki's not there. And I was like, crap. Okay. So I have the key. I'm like, I can do this. I can hold this key until I get to Nikki. I freaking left that key on the return tray. And I
Oh my
get back
god.
15 minutes later. I see Nikki and I'm like, I have the key. And I'm like, where's the key? And I have to go all the way back to the cafeteria and I'm looking in there. I'm like lifting up trays and they're like, did you lose something? And I was like, a key. And they were like, it's over there. And they saved it. And I was like, within 10 minutes, I lost the key. So I walked right back to her and I said, here's the key. This is for you. And she kept it the whole weekend as it should have been.
Good.
Because I was like, I had no business having that key to begin with. And everyone knows it. And so
Mhm.
there's no shame in that, right? I don't care. I lost the key. It was very expected. But that's the difference is that like we don't the more you try to hide your weaknesses in your business, the bigger they're going to be. The bigger they're
Mm.
going to be and the bigger challenges they're going to be and that you're going to have more struggles instead of just admitting it, saying I'm not good at organizing, I'm not good at this, I'm not this. And then we
Mhm.
can hire, manage whatever we need to do, build a skill. You can get competent yourself. It's not always hiring out, right? But
Yeah,
it's things that you can do to make it work better for you. But this all comes back to just you can't do this work or you're just going to keep hiding your weaknesses or weaknesses, we'll call them. But you're going to keep doing that until you get honest with yourself.
totally. But also,
Yeah.
I was just thinking as you were talking, is like, it's so easy to say now in our journeys to be like, yeah,
Mhm.
you need to face your weaknesses. But also, if you're at the beginning of your journey, you're like, I don't know what my weaknesses are. I've
Mhm.
never even started a business. I've never ran a business before. I don't know what I'm doing. And so, your weakness is going to be like, oh, okay, I don't know how to run a business. But I
Mhm.
feel like really the key to you understanding your weaknesses, understanding your strengths, is to just start to do it. Right.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
it's like you kind of have to fumble your way a little bit. You have to
Mhm.
fall down a few times. Like you said, as a toddler, you have to be willing to make those mistakes. And then from there, those weaknesses are going to make themselves loud and clear. And
I-
as long as you're willing to see, right? And but it's like you're not going to know that until you go for it first. And if we're trying to, like, before we start a business or at the beginning of a business, to figure out our weaknesses now, be like, okay, if I can figure all them out now, then maybe I
Mhm.
can prevent all problems. That's just impossible. And so it's like
Exactly.
you kind of just have to go for it a little bit, at least fly by the seat
Mhm.
of your pants a little bit and go. And then from there, those things will make themselves apparent and you can adjust and tweak and learn what you need to learn, outsource what you need to outsource. But like, that's something that I feel like I am so thankful that I am naturally that person that just jumps in, because I think that that's can be a really, really stuck point for so many people, is like they want to solve all their problems before they even start. And then
Mhm.
you never start. You just can't start, you because that it locks you up, right? Like, and so you can't have your focus on the weakness. You have to have your focus on just the doing of it and allow what comes to come and then learn from that.
Right. Just full circle back to not judging yourself, right? Knowing that it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be there, knowing that the world is going to provide you with what you need to, and then just not judging it when it comes up and just allowing
Mm-hmm.
yourself to step into whatever it is that needs to step into. It's messy action. You're just taking the action. You're just building the business. If you have a weakness, don't judge it. Just allow
Mm-hmm.
it, get help if you
Mm-hmm.
need it, or build the skill that you need. There's so
Yeah.
many different ways to approach it. And so we're really wrapping up this episode here today with not judging yourself because I could keep talking
Right.
forever.
We
So
really
not
could.
judge exactly, not judging yourself and being honest and truthful with yourself. So if you were to give those that are listening, like just like your best advice of how you think that they could really grow, it could be personally or in their business, what would you tell them?
Well, I kind of just said it in the last thing I said, but really I feel like take messy action,
Yes.
to not get so locked up in your heads, because I think everything feels bigger when it's inside the mind, because the mind is so good at that. We're really, really good at creating a little thing like this and like spreading it out until it's this giant like gremlin monster in our head. And so I feel like the biggest advice I just tell everyone is, you know, you think you can't do it or you have all this idea, like just do it. And then you can get the answer to your questions, like, and so just take messy action and be willing to make mistakes and stumble and not know what you're doing. And that's not the end of the world. In fact, most people appreciate when someone is openly imperfect, right? This is who I am. I make mistakes. I'm not great. I take ownership for the choices I'm making. And so when you jump in, whether you're starting a business that's like client based or whatever you're doing, people are going to see that you're willing to do that and you're willing to go forward and that you have permission for all the pieces of it. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, tell everyone where they can find you and what offers you have right now.
for sure. So you can find me on hannahsoulmarie.com. You can also find me on Instagram at hannahsoulmarie or YouTube at Hannah Soul Marie. So literally just Hannah Soul Marie everywhere. But I also have some super exciting events coming up. There's going to be something to conversation circles starting in January. So if you want to show up as your messy self, have some conversations, and connect with some other amazing women, please join. I would love to have you there.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And I will see you next week.
Thank you.